It must have been an amazing thing to see. It must have been an amazing sight, standing there on top of the mountain with Jesus shining, radiating with light and the glory of God around him. His clothes dazzling white that the bleach on earth could not even compare. Peter and James and John must have been really overwhelmed by the sight of Jesus standing there. It was a moment they'd probably been hoping for a long time, a moment of clarity, a moment of certainty, a moment that this confirms their faith in Jesus. Jesus is shining bright with full of glory and life. This must be the Messiah. It's not that they didn't believe in Jesus. I mean, they believed in Jesus. They wouldn't have dropped all of their nets and belongings and livelihoods to follow him if they didn't believe in Jesus. I mean, they followed him into towns and villages, listening to him preach and proclaim with an authority like no other. They saw him cast out demons. They saw him cure the sick. They even saw him raise up Peter's mother-in-law when she had a fever. They've seen the miracles. They believed in Jesus. But I can imagine they might have had their doubts. I can imagine that they might not be so sure at times that this was the real Messiah. I can imagine they put all their hope in him, but they were prepared to be disappointed. Because there were other so-called messiahs around who were performing miracles, healing the sick. But Jesus seemed different. Jesus seemed unique. Jesus seemed like the one. And so as they stand on the top of the mountain, seeing Jesus transfigured before them, shining with a glory and light like they have never seen before, I can imagine that all their doubts faded away. Jesus stands there in front of them in radiant light and love. And as he is standing there, as they're watching this amazing mountaintop moment, Moses and Elijah show up and they start to talk to each other. It can't get any better. Moses and Elijah showing up, surrounding Jesus, also confirming that Jesus is not just some prophet, but the fulfillment of all the law and the prophets. And Peter's overwhelmed. I can imagine Peter's just like overwhelmed. Can't believe this. And he doesn't know what to say. He's like shaking with fear and terror. He's terrified. And he just blurts out, "It's good to be here." Peter is always the master of the obvious, right? It's good to be here. Yes, it is. But of course, Peter is good to be there. But Peter doesn't want just to celebrate the moment. Peter also wants to hold on to it. He wants to preserve it. He doesn't want this moment to end. So he says, let's build some tents. Let's build some dwelling places, some places where we can stay here on the mountain together. It's interesting to me, I think this week I've noticed something I hadn't really paid attention to before. Peter's building dwelling places. He wants to build 3 for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. But he doesn't want one for himself. Like, wouldn't you want one for yourself if you're going to stay there? He's building ones for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, I think, because he doesn't really want to be there on the mountain. He just wants to preserve Jesus and Moses and Elijah in this moment. He wants to hold on to this moment. He wants to preserve Jesus as a shining, radiant being. He wants to hold on to Jesus in this form, in this glory, in this life. He wants it to last forever. You know, I can't blame Peter. Because I want those moments to last too, right? Those moments, they're so good. They're just amazing moments. Those moments where everything seems to be right with the world, those moments you just want to hold on to forever. I want to hold on to those moments too, where your heart's just so full of love and life, where those moments where you know God is good all the time, those moments where you feel so blessed by God's grace and God's presence, those moments. I remember those moments in my life. They don't come too often, you know, those moments where you might be on a retreat with some friends. And this moment where you're like, this presence of God is real. Or that moment where you are in worship and you're listening to an amazing sermon by Jason, or you're coming to be anointed and healed at the altar and you're like, I know God's forgiveness is true. I know it's for me. Or when you're out walking in the park, maybe not these days, but maybe if you're out walking in the park and you see the beauty of God and you're like all at peace, everything is right, everything is fine. I want those moments. I understand that Peter was going through. I know he wants to hold on to that kind of moment because those moments don't last very long. Those moments don't always happen. In October of 2011, I went to Brazil, to Rio de Janeiro, to a friend's wedding and performed the wedding there off the coast of Rio at sunset on a boat. Can you get more romantic than that? It's Valentine's Day, so here we go. And so we go down to, we're in Rio de Janeiro, and you might know in Rio there's the statue of Christ up on the mountain, Cristo Redentor, and Christ is standing like this with his arms outstretched. It's Christ the Redeemer statue. And so we decide we're going to go up to the top of the mountain to see this statue up close. And so we take a train up the side of the mountain that's like this. Terrifying. But we get to the top, and there's this beautiful plaza out, and you can walk around, and you can see the city of Rio down below you, and the Atlantic Ocean in front of you. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And if you are standing there, you can turn back around and see the Christ statue standing in front of you. It's amazing and beautiful. And I remember in that moment, I took out my phone so that I could take a picture. So I took a picture of the city of Rio down below, and so the sight is so beautiful. And I turned around to take a picture of Jesus, and all of a sudden, the clouds just moved in. Like, you couldn't see a thing. You couldn't see anyone. You couldn't see this Jesus in front of you. You couldn't see the city below anymore. The clouds were just all around us. And I took a picture of that. It's on my phone right here. Maybe one day you can see it. But it is, I call it Jesus in the clouds because you really can't see that it's the Christ statue. You're like, what's that image? It's Jesus in the clouds. I understood what Peter was going through. It happened to him too. When he wanted to hold on to that moment, when he wanted to take a picture of Jesus and capture it in that moment, the clouds just moved in. He wanted to hold Jesus in that beauty, in that space. The clouds just took over. And he couldn't see. And the clarity and the certainty that he had of God was gone. It was gone. And you don't always need those clouds sometimes to block your view. Sometimes life is like that too. Sometimes life is just clouds your ability to see Jesus. Sometimes the things that happen in our world, in our life, sometimes just obscure our vision of God's divinity and glory in front of us. I want to say this past year has felt like I was standing on the top of the mountain in Rio and the clouds moved in. Like it's just like this been year of cloudy days where life is hard to see and the future is hard to glimpse and the glory of God is like away from you, not easily grasped. It's almost been a year since we've been in the pandemic. In the U.S., the virus has raged out of control and claimed more lives of our loved ones. Over 450,000 people have died from this virus in the U.S. alone. And not only have we been fearful of the disease, we've also been fearful of each other. We've been hiding and living behind masks. We've been visiting friends on computer screens. We've been staying 6 feet or more from those we love. It is just hard to see any light these days, have any good news, find any comfort and peace. And especially this past month. This past month, where one of our beloved congregational members died unexpectedly. And one of my close friends from college died unexpectedly. It's been too much sometimes. It's hard to see where God's light is shining in the world. And it isn't just grief, it's also anger, it's frustration, it's exhaustion, it's too much. It's hard to see any light. It's hard to have any hope. The clouds are too thick and they seem to be lingering around our lives for way too long. But it was in those clouds, as Peter was standing there on the mountaintop, where he couldn't see Jesus any longer, that he heard Jesus. He heard God's call of Jesus' life. He heard God in that mountaintop. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Because Jesus had been trying to tell Peter and the disciples for a very long time that Jesus was going to go into the places that are the hardest of life, that Jesus was going to go into the valley, not just on the mountain, that Jesus was going to experience rejection and suffering and death on a cross. And when the first time that Jesus told Peter this, Peter was like, nope, this can't happen. You can't do this. This won't happen to you. You are better than that, Peter was thinking. Peter does not want Jesus to suffer or be rejected or die. Peter wants Jesus to be triumphant. He wants him on the mountaintop all the time. He wants a God who comes in light and life and hope and all the glory that is there to be had. But Peter wants Jesus to bless him, shine light on him, give glory and radiance to him always. Peter does not want Jesus to suffer, to be rejected, to die. But Jesus pulls Peter back and rebukes him in front of everyone, and he says, "You get behind me, Satan." The only other time that Jesus calls someone Satan is when he calls Satan, Satan. This is pretty strong words. And Jesus says, you don't have your mind on the things of God. You have your mind on the things of humans. Jesus has been trying to tell Peter and his disciples all along that Jesus isn't here to avoid the suffering and cloudy pain of our world, but to enter into it. And entering into it, he would not look like a Messiah that we would expect. Listen to him, the voice says to Peter. Listen to him. And as quickly as the clouds moved in, they suddenly also just move away. And Jesus is back standing there looking normal and plain like he did before. I think Peter and James and John were fortunate because they got to see the glimpse of God's glory in Jesus Christ. They got to see. I think in this transfiguration, they got to see that Jesus was the Messiah, so that when they saw Jesus hanging on a cross, they would also remember that this is the Messiah they believe in. That the glorious, beautiful, shining Messiah is also an abandoned, rejected criminal on a cross. It's the same Messiah. Listen to him. Because I think we often believe that when we experience sorrow and grief or pain or disease, it's because God is removed from us, that God is sometimes punishing us, that God is somehow far away from us, that we can't experience or feel or understand God in suffering and sorrow. But I think if the Transfiguration story tells us anything, it's a story that should transfigure how we see and believe that God appears in our suffering and sorrow and pain. Because the radiant, glorious Messiah on the mountain is the same radiant, glorious Messiah hanging on a cross. That the same radiant, glorious Messiah on the mountain is the same Messiah that grieves in the garden. That the Messiah that is radiant and glorious on that mountaintop is the same Messiah that suffers and dies and rises again with wounds in his hands and his side and his feet. Transfiguration Sunday, this Sunday, rejects our notion that God only shows up when we're comforted or happy or blessed. Transfiguration rebukes our notion that God only comes in the experience of the grandeur. Instead, the Messiah shows up and resides in places where we cannot see or feel God at all. The Messiah resides as much in our loneliness as in our happiness. The Messiah resides as much in our sorrows as in our hallelujahs. The Messiah resides as much in absence as in presence. I don't always feel Jesus is here with me. I don't always feel comfort when I'm grieving. I don't always have peace for my anger. I don't always see or feel Jesus' spirit or presence around me. But I do believe Jesus is there. Maybe beyond my grasp or sight at the moment, but I still believe Jesus is there. Because I know that Jesus has gone through the hardest places of our world, has been rejected, has suffered, and died in a place where we'd never imagine a Messiah to be. I still believe Jesus is there, leading me, guiding me, even when I feel nothing at all. After Peter and James and John have this clouded experience of Jesus, they walk back down the mountain. I can imagine they keep glancing over at Jesus once in a while, like, is he going to shine again? Is there a glimmer of light in his eyes? Will there be something better than this, than what he's doing now? You know, I bet Jesus noticed this too. I bet Jesus noticed that they were looking for this glory again, this light to shine, because 2 more times Jesus tells him in the Gospel of Mark that he's going to be rejected, that he's going to suffer, that he's going to die and rise again. Listen to him. I don't know if the disciples ever understood that. I don't know if the disciples ever understood that Jesus on the mountaintop is also the Jesus who goes into the valley. Maybe after the resurrection, they kind of got it. Maybe after the resurrection, they could see clearly that Jesus was residing in the suffering and the sorrow, the grief and the pain and the death of this world. Maybe. It may not always feel like it that Jesus is there when we're hurting so much. We may not always see the glory of God or experience God's peace. But I believe the Messiah is there. I believe he's there. I believe he's here. Listen to him.